Hey, what's going on? Welcome into another episode of the Ask Level podcast. Alongside Chris Level, I'm Choice Woodman. This podcast, as usual, brought to you by our friends at Cantex Roofing and Construction. Level, we've got a game under our belts. Red Raiders have opened the season, and I'm guessing most people anywhere didn't predict it to go the way it did. Almost everybody would have predicted it to go in favor of the Red Raiders, but a 52 to 51 overtime win in Lubbock was not how most people had it drawn up.
I hope you bet the over choice.
I think each team almost hit the over individually.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean it was season openers are show and tell. I mean, there's no more talk about what you think or,
mhm.
it's you put a product out there and I think it was a bit telling. I think we um the negative is obviously you just didn't have any answer for them defensively.
Yeah.
You couldn't get any pressure. I think Maverick MacGyver had a career day. I mean, he threw for around 2,000 yards last year, and I mean, he had a fourth of that in this game alone.
Wow.
You're the only school in the country that gave up over 500 yards passing in the opening weekend, and just eh, I I think we saw exactly why you were picked ninth or tenth in the league as opposed to any higher than that. I think people were looking at how much you lost on defense from an experience standpoint, and there's some concerns about the offensive line and just the trenches in general, and I think all that showed up. So it was the show and tell part. It was telling. I think there's some positives, obviously. I think, but the overall, like, the depth on defense that you have and the strength in numbers, I think what you see is that, we already knew this, but I think we were trying to talk ourselves into a positive, or this being a positive, and that it's
Yeah.
it's you have a bunch of same as, but you just have a bunch of guys right now. Doesn't mean it will stay that way, but nobody really stepped up and made any plays on that defensive side. And I even think, a linebacker group that I thought it was on paper was really, really good, and I think they got exploited a bit, trying to chase running backs around and just giving up some things across the middle, underneath, and a lot of busted. I can't sit here and tell you that I know how much of this was busted coverage, but there's some finger pointing, like, hey, I thought you were, and then there was a lot of talk after the game about miscommunication.
Yeah.
That's a part about young players. It's why coaches love older guys, because a lot of that is mitigated. You just don't have a lot of those types of issues because those young kids have typically worked through a lot of that, and they're still good enough to be playing as an older player, but you just don't have a lot of those.
Yeah. I mean, quite, it just seemed like on the defensive side, um, it just seemed like you had a bunch of guys that looked green out there. I mean, looked like it was their first
Well,
time
because
playing college
that's
football, and it
that's
wasn't
that,
for
yeah.
some of them. I mean, you had a lot of these guys we've mentioned are had minutes last year, had to be kind of thrust into action, and actually did pretty well. But this is their first time as leaders, a lot of them. So it was not expected, obviously. It was just kind of a shock, right? I mean, we look at it, amazing atmosphere. I think Jensen mentioned it on the broadcast last night, but I can't remember an opening game against an FCS opponent that was quite like that. In terms of crowd sellout, just and it wasn't one of those sellouts where you sold that many tickets and people didn't put butts in seats. It seemed like a true 60,000 full. Um, and so you weren't lacking in any energy in the building. And quite frankly, Level, it just had feels and shades of what you experienced in Laramie last year. And fortunately, it didn't have the same result, but you get up big. It feels like you're going to cruise to a victory. You have a comfortable halftime lead, and then it just dissipates. This time a little different because your defense can't stop anybody. But um, does this team lack a killer instinct over the last couple of years?
I mean, I don't.
Like just to be able to put a
Yeah,
foot on a throat or whatever.
the learning how to win component.
Sure.
Yeah, because you're up 32-14 against an FCS team at home, and you think, okay, I mean, this is where some teams just okay, they turn that into
Yeah.
49-14 and the game's over. But this isn't what happened here. You just yeah, couldn't get them stopped. Couldn't make the play, maybe at that point in the game to where it kind of removes any doubt, and you'd let them hang around. And I think you're extremely lucky to win.
Yeah.
I think you made a play on the last play of the game that won the game, but there's some plays there at the end of regulation that where they're throwing into the end zone that
Yeah.
slight underthrow. And I mean, it's just you were extremely lucky. And this is, you factor in, I mean, what if you don't go for two earlier in the game?
Hmm.
What if you don't convert the 4th and 13, to Jalen Conyers in the corner of the end zone, which was a bang bang call and a play,
Yeah.
and you make a great play, and they could have easily said, "Hey, nah, we're taking that off the board." And I don't think any of us could have, argued with that, but it stands and you take it. But yeah, I mean,
I mean, you look at some of the stats from this game, it's unreal. ACU goes for 615 yards. You already mentioned the 500 passing yards, 506 on that front. But the stats that stand out the most to me, Level, in this game, and besides that, are your third down numbers. And it's 11 for 16 that ACU gets. Tech was 8 for 15, which was just fine. But 11 for 16. And at one point, that was 8 for 10. They had converted
well, at one point it was 10 of 13.
10 of 13. I mean,
Yeah,
it
man, it was.
was, yeah. And then the other one is 11 penalties for 79 yards. The third down numbers and the penalty numbers um, are things that, if those things don't change, you're not going to beat really anybody the rest of the season. Obviously, that's speaking in extremes, but those are two areas that have got to get massively better in coming weeks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, there's no.
and I think Joey, this is one of the things that Coach McGuire talked about after
Mhm.
the game. He had talked about it before the game. When, like, what do you want to see? What are some things you want to focus on? And there's obviously, yeah, you want to get your takeaways and you want to be good in certain aspects and all that. There's some obvious things, but I knew that, like, especially on offense, there were, minimal pre-snap penalties, and you
Mhm.
had way too many false starts. There's a lot of new pieces, but everybody's got new pieces. It's just part of it now, and you've
Yeah.
got to figure out how to overcome it quickly. Um, but I just defensively, I just worry about the lack of pass rush, the lack of. I mean, Maverick McIver had a career day, but he just never felt much pressure until the last play of the game, really.
Yeah.
I mean, he never had to, you never moved him off of his spot. He's able to kind of sit back and just chunk it. And he had guys running free, which made it easier on him. And that's a secondary issue. But, you've got to create a level of pressure, and you just couldn't do it. And I think that Tim DeRuyter at times blitzed some, and it burned you a few times. It worked. But, um, that it does obviously worry you about the season, but specifically this next week. You know that Washington State's going to throw the ball a
Yeah.
lot, and they've got some pieces that can do that. So
Yeah.
and that there, the positives were you knew you had a weapon with your kickoff returner. And I think that was a positive. Dre
Absolutely.
McCray was a bright spot. And there's a 74 yarder and a 65-yard return. I mean, those are big time plays by him.
Sure there.
One of which you only ended up with a field goal on, which is frustrating. The other one, though, you end up, I think the first play is like the flea flicker, and you
Yeah.
poke that one in the end zone. So that's a one play drive. I think that it's pretty clear that the offensive skill is upgraded. I think
Yeah.
and there were times last year where there was like 40 to 50 yards after the catch in an entire game. And the last season, just in general, that was a big problem, is that there's just not a lot of plays being made
Hmm.
and you end up with 187 yards after the catch. I think that's fun, and a positive. And I don't, offensively, yeah, there's some play calls. The 4th and 1 at the goal line. I think the thought was likely, we have Taj Brooks. We need a yard
Uh,
in it, but it just
Usually that's a no-brainer. Yeah.
yeah, he had no chance, and
Yeah.
that's just that group up front. Can you run it when everybody knows you're going to run it? Is the kind of the
Mhm.
where because I think it's a decent offensive line right now. It's probably the same as it was last year, give or take a little bit. We'll kind of see what the issue is with Davion Carter, who left the game with a
Yeah.
banged up, I think as Joey termed it, after the game, and so we'll kind of see where that stands. But just my main issue, and I'll tell you what else, it didn't end up being a thing, but it sure made me nervous as this was happening. But you're alternating kickers, and at some point you needed, I mean, these extra points and these
They
field
got
goals, you're just kind
they
of
got
holding your
important.
breath.
Yeah.
They did get important. I mean, Reese Burkhardt makes a very crucial field goal
Yeah.
in the late stages of that game. His first
41
one of
yarder.
a
Yeah.
Tech career, yeah, 41 yarder, not a chip shot.
Hmm.
So I'm just thinking, like, I mean, but yeah, and again, Keith coming back here, and there's a lot of familiarity with this place, but then there's a lot of players probably with a chip on their shoulder and all those
Sure.
things. But I just was not that was just not a good defensive performance. It just wasn't,
No.
and they were on their heels most of the night. And just didn't really have an answer. I think they tried to switch from zone to man and back and forth, and it just, ACU had an answer for everything. Okay, you want to play man, we're going to throw it to the running back. We're going to throw it underneath a bunch. You want to play zone, we're going to pick you apart that way too. And you just had a lot of youth and inexperience in the secondary, and yeah, it just was not what I was, and you find out before the game that Braylon Lux isn't going to play.
Yeah.
He would have helped for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because I think that Jalen Peoples gave up some plays and got picked on and just found out he was going to start, earlier in the afternoon,
Sure.
which was his first college start. And that's just part of the youth and inexperience. And Braylon Lux is clearly your best corner, but it doesn't solve 500 yards passing,
No, it's
unfortunately. Yeah.
but it might be the difference in you playing in an overtime game and not in
Maybe.
terms
I mean,
of
maybe,
yeah,
and
yeah. I mean,
I
it's
was
not a full excuse at all, but it there were definite problems in the secondary, and you could have used your best corner last night, no question.
but
Um,
they're gonna have to grow up in a hurry.
no question about
And
that. Because
unfortunately, it just takes time, and you don't have it.
yeah. And you get to face two strong offenses the next 2 weeks as well. So we'll get into that in a bit. Let's go ahead and before we preview what's coming up this week level, let's get to a couple of questions because obviously people have questions after last night's, more questions than answer, or after Saturday night, more questions than answers. Let's start with this one from Braden. Says, why did the defense look like it was lost the whole night? There's lots of questions in one. Is it on coaching? Did the scheme outsmart us that much? There were poor tackling, busted coverages. Is this just who we are for this year?
I don't want to think that's who you are. I think that it's hard for me to envision them playing any worse.
Mhm.
So I think it can only go up from here. The young players will get more experience and get better, you would hope. I don't think they're bad players, but when you have miscommunication, it does, small mistakes against good skill or at this level, they go for 7 points at times, a misstep here or there, or get your hips turned the wrong way, or I thought you had over the top coverage, all those kinds of things. I mean, that's an ACU. I mean, again, this is an FCS opponent, folks.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they, Cleveland and Nehemiah, and there's plenty of guys that were good enough to play for you at one point. But this, you're going to see much better competition, including this weekend. And yeah, the I think they were physical in fall camp, but I think I would agree that some of the tackling, or you just think you're going to lay somebody out and you don't wrap up and they keep going, which was the case with Isaiah Johnson multiple times.
Yeah, and again that goes into the factor probably of him being extra motivated. He would not go down last night.
And
Was
he's a Lubbock
former
kid.
yeah,
Yeah,
former
Lubbock
Cooper
Cooper. Yeah.
Cooper kid. So and credit him. He had a great night.
Hmm.
But yeah, it seemed like time after time it was one of those games where okay, popped him in the backfield or popped him at the line of scrimmage. I mean, one particular play he gets hit. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was Henry. I can't remember who. He gets hit at the 6 yard line, and it's like, oh, okay, you got to stop finally,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah,
somehow
he's
squirts through all the way to the end zone. It's just one of those, yeah, one of those nights that is not a banner night for the film for sure.
yeah,
Uh,
were you just in an opener, especially with a new coach on the other side, not a lot of
mhm.
background there to try to get a feel. You're watching another program's concepts and then trying to figure out, okay, he's got different players here. What exactly are we
Yeah,
going to see? There's a level of figuring out kind of what the game plan is and figuring out, like in openers specifically, when there's not a lot of things on film, what the opposition's going to do, and then you try to adjust accordingly. But it just felt like they couldn't ever get a beat on it.
yeah,
And whether you tried to adjust and wholesale changes or whatever it was, you just never really quite got it settled down, and you're lucky to win. I mean, that's all there is to it. Yeah, you made a play to win it, but you were there's some luck there too.
sure,
And I mean, if I'm ACU, I probably feel like in a way you won the game, even though it's not the way it's going to show up. That's not how it counts, but
right,
yeah, if you're Tech, you feel like you lost. If you're ACU, you feel like you won, and yet somebody's got to win and a loss in those columns. But I, in the I don't want to like I'm trying to think of like how to phrase this. It's almost like, and I don't know whether this was the youth or maybe I'm just missing. It just it looked like the defense was the right word is not uninspired, but and I don't want to think that they were just overconfident
that could be the case.
or overlooking because you've done nothing. A lot of these kids had never played before,
Sure.
or if it was just like, ooh, there's a lot going on here. I got a lot of fire and bright lights and pyro going off and this fancy stadium, and I can't hear because the sound system, and like I'm gonna freak out. I
Hmm.
don't know. I don't know
Yeah,
what it was, but it equaled miscommunication. It equaled looking like it was too much for some of them at times
yeah,
because you had guys just running open. And
way open, a lot.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's, because
yeah,
I remember, I think Joey said that after the first scrimmage, like, hey man, we didn't, or maybe it was Tim or Joey. He's like, hey, we didn't get beat over the top on anything.
hmm,
We were running with them, and
sure.
and so is that because what the offense is doing, and kind of some of the concepts and all that? I really don't know, but you better get it addressed quickly. And I know that they're frustrated, but it's you're trying to feel good about the result that you got, but knowing all the while, boy, we got a lot to clean up,
Yep.
and not a lot of time to do it if you want to have a meaningful season.
This from the Twitter feed. Yeah. Well, there's Ryan that says WTF. So there's that one. Thanks for that question, Ryan. Here's another one from Paolo on Twitter. Says, how is this team expected to compete for Big 12 title or at least win 8 games when an FCS team comes and punches you in the mouth? ACU may be talented, but I sure thought these millions of dollars in facilities would have attracted talent that wouldn't allow this type of game.
Yeah, and these are all fair criticisms. I mean, I certainly understand it. There's a lot of money flowing through not just this program but others, and I think it's things have changed, and I certainly understand frustrations there, and I get the WTF because I mean I kind of
You
felt the
feel it, yeah,
level of shock as well, just not
yeah,
what I expected to see. But that's why people are going to get frustrated when I say this, but this is also why we love sports because it's not
yeah. I mean,
there's an unknown there, and you think you kind of have a feel for things, and we kind of you go off of what you hear and what you think you know, and then
right.
like I said, it's show and tell, and it wasn't what we thought.
I mean,
And
speaking of talent and facilities and those sorts of things, I mean, one of the favorites to be in the college football playoff and maybe win the national championship, the Oregon Ducks had pretty good little scare in their first game with Idaho. And
yeah,
that one is
you can point to a lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
different. There's plenty of people that blew teams out. There's plenty of people that
right.
struggle. Idaho's a really good team
Sure.
at that level. They've got some tradition,
But
and
they were 49-point favorites in that game, and they ended up getting one at the end to make it 10-point game, so it doesn't look as close. And it's not a overtime loss. I'm just saying, like you said, it is sports, and we could sit and predict it and expect it to go whatever way. Um, but I don't think you throw in the towel on the Oregon Ducks for the season because they played a close game in the first one. And this leads me to the next question level. Someone says, does this completely alter your expectations? This one is from Jake. Does this one completely alter your expectations, or are you still holding out hope that this game was the anomaly?
well, I think at this point it does alter my expectations. Yeah, because you need to see some of what we thought we were going to, because this won't fly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in the Big 12, I mean, there's some you're going to deal with some serious talent and coaching and all those things. I mean, you've got some draft picks coming up on your schedule fairly quickly. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you go to Tucson, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Which they didn't
so
have the greatest game either against New Mexico in the
no, they
game.
didn't, but
And
they ended up winning by how much?
I don't was it 17? I don't remember the final.
Okay, yeah,
But they
they
gave up
were.
31 points to a team that was is supposed to be a pretty poor team too. I'm just saying I think we're seeing what you and I have talked about before. The gap is lessening between FCS teams, between lower level teams and middle of the pack or non-blue blood teams in Power Five because you're seeing all that. I mean, just look at the number of Power Five or former Power Five players that were on ACU's roster last night. We're going to continue to see more and more games like this where games are closer because there is that level of talent that has moved around that much with the transfer portal.
I mean, there is truth in that, but there's plenty of examples of 70 to
Oh,
zero
sure there is.
wins and stuff around the
70 to
country.
30,
Yeah,
your next opponent beat Portland State
yeah.
70 to 30. So,
Um,
yeah, I get it. I'm just saying that
I just looked at though. I just felt like that there would be more juice on defense. I think Joey and Tim had both really, felt like there was a lot of speed. There was a lot of depth.
mhm.
That they'd had a really good camp, and there's a few injuries here and there, but that's where the depth is supposed to help you. And that because
Yep.
no Adederay, no Esters, no Wilcox, no Lux. Those guys, I think, all would have played in the
Hmm.
game. But it's an FCS opponent, and that
It
would have been
is.
the biggest win in Abilene Christian's history. I mean, I don't think
Hmm.
they'd ever beaten a Division One team before, and still haven't, I guess. But that's the part that look, I don't have any issue with anything there's a few play calls here and there on offense that I think you could get frustrated with or question. But this was just to me, unfortunately, a night that you just were on your heels defensively and you just didn't. And I'll tell you what, like if you dig down, last year's defense wasn't like just overall great.
Yeah.
They were pretty good, and they didn't take the ball enough away. They didn't get to the quarterback enough. But I tell you where they were good. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think their red zone defense was pretty good. They would maybe, play a little looser in between the 20s. Then when they get to inside the 20, that they would tighten up and they would force some field goal attempts, or they would, that's where they kind of bowed up. And I think against Abilene Christian, I mean, ACU was 5 for 5 inside the red zone on scoring opportunities, and I felt like you couldn't keep them out,
Yeah.
and that part concerns me. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
guess,
yeah,
sorry, though.
no, that's okay.
I was just saying, I guess for me, the anomaly type of question, I guess I still do hold out hope because the defense we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years has been an improving defense and has been nowhere close to what we saw on Saturday night. So I guess I still need to see that happen again before I believe, okay, you've just completely fallen off a cliff when it comes to defense.
Yeah, Tim's a really good coordinator. I mean, a
Yeah,
really good coach. He's coached really good defenses for years and years. He's coached high level draft picks. I mean, Von Miller, Kayvon Thibodeau, Tyree Wilson. I mean, there's plenty of people in
sure.
his past that he's like got the most out of,
Hmm.
and all those things. And they will get better. But I mean, it was one of the first things Joey said at the beginning of August. I think if I remember correctly, like in some order, it was the O line needs to step up.
Yep.
Like we would agree. Uh, Keeping your quarterback healthy, but
Hmm.
the one defensive thing that he answered with was the youth in the secondary needs to
Young.
grow
Yep.
up, and that's going to be a thing until it's not. And
Hmm.
you've got a lot of redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores, or people that have transferred in that are playing their first games. There's just a lot of just generally inexperience back there,
Hmm.
especially playing together, and it just looked like that every worst thing that could happen on that side of the ball did. I mean,
Yeah.
you had the one takeaway, but just yeah, not being able to bow up in the red zone or on third down, that's losing football. And you were very fortunate to survive. And that's why most people, I guess, are feel like this was a loss
Yeah.
or a sign of things to come. And I don't know if I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater or anything like that, but I
Sure.
do I do alter my expectations from the standpoint of it needs to be more. I don't even want to get into like what
Oh,
how many
sure.
games could you win this year? Can you
Right.
contend for? I mean, those are not even questions worth even getting into or asking because you're worried about today,
Yeah.
tomorrow, the next day, and like this weekend and whatnot because you just didn't see what you thought you were going to see. And so, okay, what's this going to look like in 2 weeks or a month from now or 6 weeks from now? Because I feel like that they would maybe tell you, and they're going to say the right things, and they're going to try to stay confident and not finger point or point, throw each other under the bus. But there's probably a level of concern there, and there should be
Yep.
on that side of the ball. And were they trying to do too much? Were they trying to play too many people? Were they
Mm.
trying to did they not have a beat on the game plan and made the wrong adjustments? I don't know, but I just felt like Rick Bowie, the offensive coordinator that had come from Valdosta for ACU, he had your number all night long, and he
Big
had
time.
kids that were executing repeatedly.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, I mean, it was entertaining if you didn't have a vested interest in one of these
Sure.
two teams. If you were just watching it, I mean, it was great entertainment. But boy, yeah, that was it was some serious stress, and I think I even said that on the broadcast after that field goal to take the lead at the end when you kind of had to settle for it. It was the quietest I'd ever heard it with that many people in
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
with a made field goal by the home team.
Here's a
Just
question.
the
Sorry, go
crowd
ahead.
was kind of in shock.
Yeah, which is crazy. The crowd from that point in the game to, or the beginning of the game to that. I mean, it just they took you completely out of it on that front. Question here from Vance level. We've only got a little bit of time for a couple more. This one says, "Why does it always seem like Tech has played to the level of the opponent under Joey McGuire? It seems like we get up for teams that are better than us and play down to teams that are not as good as us.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair question to ask. I think until you can win some games handily against
Mhm.
subpar competition. The thing about though this year is that you're not going to see anybody that's just necessarily subpar. Everybody's going to be
Oh,
competitive. I think, the Cincinnati's and Arizona States and Baylor's were kind of picked at the low end of the Big 12, but based on what we saw, they're going to be, and I don't think the top teams, in other words, are going to be just so much better than you that they can run circles around you. And you don't see either school from Kansas or Utah. So I don't know if you're going to really get into too many games where you just come in and going, man, we're on paper, we're just so much better than these guys. But you would have thought you were over ACU and you just weren't.
so you're telling everybody if you're not on blood pressure medicine yet, go ahead and get it
Well, I
prescribed for
mean,
this season.
what was the number? What was the percentage last year? 42% of Big 12 games were one score
Yeah,
or less.
yeah,
I mean, so that's it's not
yeah.
half, but it's
Expect
it's
it.
it's
Yeah,
approaching that.
and
So
almost. I mean, you think about it. You had very few blowouts either direction under Joey McGuire. I mean, just almost everything is right there in the one
the
score to
game
10
in
point range.
Waco, the game in Waco last
That
year,
one
it got out of hand.
and the
I
game
even,
at
yeah,
Texas the other direction, and then
yeah,
everything else is pretty well in
yeah,
that tight range again. And it's
yeah.
just
And like the Wyoming game up 17-0. This one you're up 32-14.
mhm.
That's just when I think really good teams or great teams. That's when they squeeze.
Yeah,
It's like the what's the kind of snake that wraps around you and just kind of chokes you out and then
boa
decides,
constrictor,
okay,
python,
or
or
a python or
anaconda,
something.
or
Yeah.
yeah,
When they like wrap you up and they just start constricting those muscles and it's like,
yeah,
oh, I can't breathe. And then it's game over. And next thing you know, you're dinner.
yeah,
Um, yeah, that's kind of next step type stuff, but
sure,
it seems like you're a long way from that right now.
yeah.
You
We're
know, and,
we're
and
still
again,
in the
we could
just
we
win
could
baby
we could be
territory.
having a different conversation after this weekend, one way or
Could
the
be.
other.
Yep,
One
could be.
way or the other. Because winning on the road has not been easy either.
No, it hasn't.
And now that's going to be one of the storylines this week. Is okay. What can you go get done on the road? And it hadn't been great on the road and I know they've talked about it, trying to figure it out, different things they could do,
Yeah,
travel, preparation, practices, all the stuff. And now you've got your first test. I'd be willing to bet you, though, as we talk about Washington State just a little bit, I'd be willing to bet you. I can't sit here and tell you they held a bunch back schematically on either side. I really don't know.
yeah,
But I'd be willing to bet you that if they were holding anything back, I bet you see chips on the middle of the table this weekend against Washington State. That's how important that this game potentially could be, just because I think it's a tone setter of sorts.
yeah, yeah. I think you're right. By the way, for anybody inclined, the line floats somewhere at 1.5 on either side,
And
depending where
what
you're looking right
and
now.
were you surprised by that?
That Tech opened as a favorite. Um,
I mean, I
Honestly, I thought you would have opened as a 5 or 6 point favorite prior to yesterday's game, and I don't think Vegas overreacts too much. So I'd say no, not super surprised.
Yeah, they're Vegas is unemotional
Yeah,
with these things. They're trying to create, action and they don't get
yeah,
into, yeah, a lot that we're getting into here. But
sure.
I was surprised. I was obviously surprised. If you would have asked me, and maybe it's because I'm too invested or I'm
Hmm.
too caught in the moment, but I would have thought you would have been a 6 or 7 point dog, if anything,
Hmm.
and to see it open as a 1 point favorite, I'm like, were they not watching? I mean, was
Were
was
they not
nobody,
watching?
which tells you, that's the old saying, it's never as good as it seems, it's never as bad as it seems. But
You're
I
exactly
don't,
right. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know,
Or
I don't
maybe it is,
know,
and we don't know yet.
but that's why you play them out.
That's right.
Yeah, because at
Yeah.
some point you are what you are, but we're a long way from that.
Yeah,
But
you're one game in. So,
there's some Houston Baptist and some SFA games and some things like that kind of showed you in your recent
hmm.
history that showed you kind of a sign of things to be. And that's why you have to hit the pause button and go, maybe I should alter expectations.
Yeah.
Maybe I should, but I guess I'm just going to try to not really look too far ahead and do the whole, let's
Yeah,
just,
you're
yeah.
allowed to get better. You're allowed to buck trends like that.
And
And
that's what Joey's teams have done.
yep,
Typically, been rocky early and in the early middle portions of your schedule, and then
sure.
you do was it 6-2 in November?
That's correct. Yeah.
But
8-2 if you count the December games too.
you can't compete for conference championships with too many stumbling blocks
No, you can't.
early on, and these are games that don't count toward that. But it's just about it's just about trying to get better in general. Obviously, the score goes without saying, but you're just trying to figure some things out, like get pressure on the quarterback, like not have guys running wide open in the secondary, and those kinds of things.
Level on paper as we go towards Washington State, um, how fitting is it going to be? On paper, it looks like you're going to get a lot of points scored in this game. Mike Leach is going to be honored, obviously coached for both teams. You got a chance for a super shootout type of game up in Pullman this weekend.
And Vegas thinks this game will be in the mid 60s, which is a bit lower than I would have
That's
guessed.
interesting. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is what
So
I would have guessed.
so we'll see.
Again, so yeah, we will see. But yeah, this is going to be this is the game that was supposed to be going to Outson Stadium. Instead, you're going to
Hmm.
Pullman. But this is not an easy place to play. It's difficult to get to.
Hmm.
They're really good at home. I think there's the power forward chip on the shoulder kind of
Sure there is.
thing.
Yeah.
There's you got the Mike Leach deal. I mean, this game will be sold out, nighttime, all the things working against you. And I hope that you are ready for it, because I hope you know what you're getting into. And you've got Darcel McBath, Clay McGuire, Josh Kelly. There should be a lot of people in your own building
Oh
that
yeah.
should be well aware and can get in front of everybody and go, this is what's about to happen, and you better understand what you're about to get into here. And that really is regardless of the result against Abilene Christian. But yeah, John Mateer was throwing the ball all over the place yesterday, and Ben Arbuckle, who's a Canadian, he's from Canadian,
Yeah.
spent some time at West Texas A&M.
Yep.
He knows Zach Kitley well from
Oh
their days
sure.
at Western
Sure.
Kentucky together, and so yeah, they'll have some things dialed up. So
Yeah.
yeah, here we go.
Here we go indeed, and hopefully we have a little happier show next week. We'll see. We'll see. But
Yeah.
level, good stuff as usual. We'll talk to you after the next one.
Sounds good. Thank you again to Cantex Roofing. Thanks to you, Woodman. And yeah, football season's supposed to be fun, right? Supposed to be
Zero
fun.
fun, sir.
That's what they told me. I just hope both teams have fun, right? That's what
The
that's what
Rob,
somebody said about the Tech
oh,
ACU game, and both
yeah,
teams kind of had fun, but not really.
apparently so.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
Chris Level. I'm Choice Woodman.